It was one of those situations that if Gideon had really known what was about to happen, he probably would have chosen just to go back to sleep. Now, here's what we need to understand. Gideon knew for all of his life to that point that God had called him to a very specific and important purpose. He wasn't totally sure about this one. Morning happened, morning came, and Gideon got up like normal to go about his normal daily chores around the farm. Right as he got up and got out, he was met face to face with God himself. And this is what he was told. He was told, Gideon, here's what I want you to do. Not, I want you to go and erect this huge building or this huge statue or whatever. I want you to go to war with one of Israel's enemies. Gideon, in his mind, was going, absolutely not. We have been at war with them for ages. There is no way that I'm going to get involved. But Gideon also had this side of his mind, where he knew that God even told them, if something comes, test me. Test me and see if this is really what I want you to do. So he goes, well, God said it, so I will do it myself. Goes and says, well, if this is really you, if this is really what you're wanting me to do, I have this test for you. Here's what I want you to do. Gave him what he said and went through that day, woke up the next morning, and it came to pass exactly the test that Gideon asked for. So Gideon went, well, this might have just been a fluke. Let's do the opposite. God said, okay, I will do that for you. Next morning he woke up and the opposite thing happened. Now, I don't know about you. From my side, I want to run the opposite direction. But that's the thing we need to remember. When God calls us to do something, He always promises that He's going to provide for what's going on. That's probably what was going through Gideon's mind. Well, okay, you've done it twice. What am I really supposed to do? Is this really a good thing to be questioning or even testing God? God met with him again and gave him instructions, and Gideon basically said, as you ask, I will go and I will do. Maybe that's something we need to think about too. Gideon thought about it and thought about it and prayed about it all through that day, and he knew exactly what he needed to do. So he went into town and made an announcement to all the guys in town, telling them at this certain time, at this certain place, they would be meeting for a very important decision that needs to be made, and that's going to war with this enemy. Everyone was extremely excited because there obviously must be power with Gideon for him to even think about doing this. Some, I'm sure, looked at him and went, this man is very crazy. There is no way, let alone that God has spoken to him, but going against one of our major enemies? No, 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 no. You just don't do that. This is absolutely crazy. We might say the same thing if God asked us to do this in our time. Time and date came, and a bunch of guys came to see whether it was that Gideon was extremely crazy or maybe this is what God asked him to actually do. And maybe he was asking them to do this as well. Gideon stands up and he says, listen, guys, here's what we're going to do. All those that are afraid, I want you to go home. Don't stay here. Go home now. You're not needed. Just leave. A lot of people are looking around going, no, this is a good group to have. We need all the people we can get. But many people left to where there was about 3,000 men left. And they're looking around going, oh, well, maybe we can win, maybe not. Well, Gideon says that God's on our side, so, well, we've got that promise, but I don't know about this. It still doesn't feel right. God impressed Gideon to do another thing. He told the men to follow him down to the local stream. And he said, okay, guys, drink. And he watched how they drank. There's a good group of men that just put their heads into the stream and just drank and drank and drank and drank. While others, they bent down on one knee and they cupped the water with their hands and they were watching intently to everything that was going on around them. God whispered in Gideon's ear and he said, the men that drank with their cupped hands, those are the men that will stay. Gideon got up and said, listen, God has spoken, and here's what God told me. Those of you that drink with your cupped hands are welcome to stay, and God promises us victory. Those of you that did not, you need to leave. By the time all these other guys left, there was about 300 men left. And I'm sure they were looking around, looking at each other, going, there is no way that we're going to win. Absolutely no way that 300 guys against millions in an army that could never be beaten at the time. There's no way we can win. Gideon stands up again and he says, listen, guys, God has assured us the victory. He's given us his promise, and he is going to see us through. That had to be an amazing thing to hear. Gave a number of them encouragement, and others kind of were still skeptical, but they knew what they needed to do, and they followed. Gideon said, listen, here's what we're going to do. On this certain date at this certain time, right before night, we're going to meet in this certain field. I want you to come, but come with nothing. I will explain what will happen when you get here at that time. Time got closer, and Gideon and a friend of his were talking, and both were feeling very nervous about what was going to happen and what was going on. So Gideon said, well, why don't we sneak down to the camp of the enemy and listen to what was going on, to what was going to happen? And they snuck into the camp of the enemy close to one of the tents of a very major military professional. And in that tent, a number of people were talking. And they were talking because they all had different dreams about the same thing. And what that happened to be is they were dreaming of Gideon and his army, and that his small dinky army was going to crush them. Basically, this rock rolling down from the hill, crushing the entire army to where they would never be ever again. It wouldn't be the same as a nation. And they basically looked at each other going, forget this, we're leaving. So these army officials snuck out in the middle of the night and were never seen or heard of ever again because they wanted nothing to do with Gideon and what God was going to be doing to their army and their nation very soon. Gideon and his friends slipped away, and they were so excited, praising God continually because God had showed them what was going to happen and how he was going to work. And so they woke up everyone and told them, now is time. We're doing this now. Meet us in this field. They got them all prepared with lit torches and lamps over the torches, ready to go to battle. And Gideon said, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a torch with a lamp in one hand and a trumpet in the other. You will need no weapons because God is our victory. God is going to see us through this. He's given us his promise, and he will see it through to completion. Some people were still questioning, still unsure, but when he said that God was going to give that surety, they knew that was going to happen. So they went and they surrounded that area of the camp. And when Gideon gave the signal, all of them broke the pots that were around their flaming torch, held the torch up high, and blew their trumpet loud, saying, "For God and for Gideon." And they rushed down that hill. As they rushed down, there was so much confusion in the enemy camp that they started killing each other. And Gideon's army didn't have to worry about anything because God was taking care of what needed to be taken care of. That army disappeared, and they were not a threat to the children of Israel for many, many, many generations. And after that, that area proclaimed Gideon to be one of their judges because he had listened to God and he was ready to do what God promised that he was going to do. Now that takes real courage, doesn't it? To not just to listen to God, but to go forward with what he asks for us to do. Now that's something I want to challenge you on today. If God's asking you to do something, test him first. But then when the tests come through, when he comes through like he said he is always, take the promise and run with it, knowing that what God has to say is sure, it is true, and it will see you through. That's my prayer for you today, that you continue to seek God, continue to ask the questions, continue to ask for help, and to run to him with the greatest energy ever, knowing that he is doing what needs to be done. And he's giving you the victory because he's promised.